Hello, YouTube. Hello. Here's a kitty. It's my kitty. She has other plans. Okay, well, you got to see her for a second. Uh, anyway, I know that I have not posted for a long time. Not that anybody was talking about it, but that's just because I haven't had anything that I really wanted to talk about. But today I have, and it's in the form of the Martian Chronicles. One of the great sci fi classics of all time, the story of man's colonization of Mars, the displacement ish of the original inhabitants, and all the little stories of the people that are involved in this massive history, which spans, about 1 year. And then suddenly time skips about 20 years, but we'll talk about that later. Um, I just wanted to say my sister invited me into reading this book because her book club that meets every once in a while, formed of friends and other friends from work, uh, decided to pick this book 1 month. So she asked me about it. She said, George, you know that book, right? And she sort of invited me to participate in a purely, what is the word, virtual, in a in a not actually participate in the book club, but just sort of participate in that. I would read this book and talk about it with my sister, who would then go talk about it with her book club. I had it sitting on my shelf for a while, so I decided to finally pick it up. It's a intriguing novel. It's calling it a novel is really distasteful because it really is not a novel. It's a book. It's a book in the purely medieval sense of the term, where this physical object, this binding, is here to just connect these pages. And on these pages are just written a bunch of ideas that have been like collated and put together in this one object that I can hold. And over the years, perhaps it's been edited other times. So there's multiple versions of this book that I'm holding. There's multiple versions of what is written therein. It has been edited heavily. It's a very medieval kind of thing we're talking about. It's a fix up novel. Those of you who are fans of vintage science fiction will definitely know what a fix up novel is, but those who don't, it's when a bunch of short stories, usually short stories that are published in magazines, often short stories that are completely unrelated to each other, will be compiled and turned into a fix up novel. What is termed as a fix up novel. Usually all the stories are like lined up, and then the author comes by and just like solders them together with these thin little extra bits that they've woven into there. And sometime at the best of times, the resulting plots are totally uneven, but they make sense. It's like if every Sherlock Holmes short story with Moriarty was put together and sold as a novel. That's what this is, except this is more at the other extreme end of the scale. These stories are completely unrelated to each other. I think all of them are completely unrelated. I think all the similarities are just added later. And it's really obvious in this case. Extremely, extremely obvious. Because the Mars in each version, in each of these stories, is obviously supposed to be a completely different Mars. And the only details that seem to add up are little similarities, like all the Martians are described the same. Like some of them have yellow coin-like eyes, they're small, they're brown. Those words are used all the time when describing the Martians. A couple of the same character names pops up, but it always feels like the way it does in a fractured fairy tale, where you hear like the seven dwarves talking about Pinocchio or something. It doesn't feel natural. It feels like it was added in later. So already you can see my big problem with this book is that it's just completely uneven. Absolutely uneven. I understand it's a fix up novel. That's kind of the point. You're supposed to take these as individual short stories, but yeah, it's this object that I'm holding right here, this book, this thing that I and my sister and her friends all read is what is considered a classic of science fiction. Not the individual short stories contained therein, but this book as it is right now, this manuscript. And this book, judged as one coherent story, makes no sense. It makes no sense. And now, just to give you context, in the middle of this book, one short story is sort of based off of the fall of the House of Usher. It's about a guy on Mars who builds a giant haunted house that's like the House of Usher, full of animatronics like the gorilla from Murders in the Rue Morgue, the Pit and the Pendulum, like all these death traps, and invites people to come into that house and kills them and then replaces them with robot duplicates. Now, this short story has no business being in this book because literally not a single detail except that it takes place on Mars matches anything else in the rest of this book tonally, thematically, in terms of setting, in terms of world building. There are no human-like robots that are indistinguishable from humans anywhere else in this book. The dystopian Fahrenheit 451 style government that limits imagination and will arrest you if you have imagination, and who burned all works of fiction 30 years prior, is not mentioned anywhere else in this book, even though the story that took place before this one took place a month before, and the story that took place afterwards, also on Mars, took place a month afterwards. Okay. And the time skips matter too, because when the Martians go extinct in this book, which, it happens like here, so that's not a spoiler. When the Martians go extinct, they all go extinct because of chicken pox. And that's about, 1 month after a story in which the second expedition to Mars of just like 10 men entirely fails because the Martians overtook them. And that's actually a pretty cool story because they were sent to an insane asylum because it turns out believing you're from Earth is a common insanity delusion on Mars. And since the Martians are telepathic, they can transmit hallucinations from one person to another. So you can't trust what you're seeing. So even though these Earthmen have a rocket, they look like humans, they don't look like Martians. Even despite all of that, the Martians don't trust them and throw them into an insane asylum. That was a pretty cool story. But that's a clearly fully developed, fully civilized Martian world. And 1 month later, all of them are extinct because of chickenpox. So the time skips are weird. I don't know why Ray Bradbury didn't just decide to make that story take place like 5 years afterwards or something. Be- because this purports to be a history of Mars. But here's the dates: January 99, February 99, August 99, August 99, March 2000, 2000, 2001, 2001, 2001, 2002, 2002, 2002, 2003, 03, 03, 05, 05, 05, 05, 05, 05, 05, 05, 2026, 2026, and 2026. So it's more like the history of 1 year on Mars. And that 20-year time skip that came out of nowhere, that's actually because the story says the guy says my wife died 19 years ago. So it's absolutely necessary for that story. But since they all feature completely different characters, I don't know why Ray Bradbury didn't just make each story take place a more believable time apart. Okay, now I've said a lot about what I don't like about this book because that's what I'm thinking a lot about. There's a lot of inconsistencies to dig into. Uh, but I do want to talk about some things that are good. I mean, first of all the short stories actually are pretty good. Taken on their own, as original short stories, I would say that they are worth the time, yes. There are some flaws, such as like flat characters, but that's kind of because in science fiction, especially in science fiction's golden age, its infancy, the 50s, there an idea was enough to propel a story forward. And that's sort of what's so brilliant and charming about these mid-century early science fiction works, is that you can read it and say, oh me, oh my, that was interesting. And that's what I felt when I read the Insane Asylum story. It's like, wow, uh, How imagine telepaths giving each other hallucinations that are indistinguishable from reality. How could you convince them that you were an Earthman that just landed on Mars? You couldn't, even if you brought out all the information in the world, because all the auditory senses, the olfactory senses, all of that could be replicated via their telepathic delusions. So I did like that story, but that wasn't my favorite story in the collection. My favorite story was actually the one that came like right afterwards, I think, with the man named Spender. For some reason, Spender's a really memorable name. My sister remembered his name too. It's like one of the only characters in the book whose name I remember, who it's the third expedition to Mars. Okay, let's just present this as a short story because in the context of the larger story, it's a little bit out of place. Uh, um, an expedition of men land on Mars. They find all these Martian cities that are dying. They haven't even seen a living Martian. They are realizing that Mars is on the cusp of colonialization. It's perfectly, it's fertile, it's ready to be colonized, it's got water, everything. And best of all, the original inhabitants are dying. So you don't need to fight any wars with them. And not only are they dying, but they're probably, for all intents and purposes, dead. The next time a rocket comes down, there's not going to be any left. So, one man in this expedition goes off into one of these empty towns and finds a book, a few books of Martian culture. And he starts learning about that Martian culture and he decides that Mars would be better preserved. You know, it's sort of a classic story. Here, let me read you a little bit because the prose is actually very good. Ray Bradbury's prose through all these stories is pretty good. That's one of the enjoyable things about this book. But here it is. They're all here, all the things which had uses, all the mountains which had names, and we'll never be able to use them without feeling uncomfortable. And somehow the mountains will never sound right to us. We'll give them new names, but the old names are there, elsewhere in time, and the mountains were shaped and seen under those names. The names we'll give to the canals and mountains and cities will fall like so much water on the back of a mallard. No matter how much we touch Mars, we'll never touch it. And then we'll get mad at it. And you know what we'll do? We'll rip it up, rip the skin off, and change it to fit ourselves. That's a pretty good bit of quotation right there, talking about the untenability of colonizing a place. I mean, it raises the question about how far you can erase a culture. Maybe it's a bit dated in that it supposes that no matter how much they erase the culture will never really die. These days, we're a little bit more pessimistic. I think we say if you erase somebody's culture, then it can be gone forever if you're not careful, if people don't care to preserve it. And what this says is like, no matter what we do, this place will never be ours. But who knows? On a completely different planet with completely different atmosphere, completely different conditions, even the humans who call that place home, will they ever really feel like it's home? I don't know. It's a bit of an interesting question. And he raises that theme a couple of times in the story, but since it's a fix up novel, some stories seem to lean into like yes we can, others seem to lean into no we can't really. In in terms of putting all these stories together, it kind of shows a wide variety of perspectives about the colonization of Mars from told by all the many people who are part of this story. And now I said the prose was great, but not all the prose was amazing. There's this one part that I want to read out. Just let me tell you this. He did not turn. He felt a cold wind blowing. He was afraid to turn. He felt something in the seat behind him, something as frail as your breath on a cold morning, something as blue as hickory wood smoke at twilight, something like old white lace, something like a snowfall, something like the icy rime of winter on the brittle sedge. Yeah, do you think that's enough allegories in one paragraph? I mean, come on. That's a case where he went a little overboard, but honestly, I'd rather have somebody's prose go a little bit overboard sometimes than never try anything new. So that gives you a sense of the writing style in this book. it's still very enjoyable, very evocative, but some of that prose, man, it just goes a little bit far. This is why I often like to read 19th century novels. Some of these new novels go a little bit far with the like something, 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 something. It feels like things are being like plucked at random out of the air. Some of these prose styles from these days. But the stories are very good. They are very good. I wish maybe we should make a new edition of this book that is just all the original stories, all the original manuscripts, or maybe just as they were originally published in like the magazines in 48, 50, just put in the same order. And then also include those little interstitial bits that were probably written for this book so that we can sort of see it for what it really is. Oh yeah, and cut out the House of Usher thing altogether. Or I don't know, leave that in since they're not connected anymore, and then just leave it to the reader's imagination to fill in the blanks. The reader's imagination, that would be more than enough, honestly, because every time I read a book, I'm sort of editing the book in my head. I know I am. Like what would this be like as a movie? Or like if I rewrote this book, what would it be like? Or like, yeah, the author said that happened, but here's what I think really happened, kind of thing. I that's a fine habit to have. It means that you're engaged with the story. Mm. But yeah, that's the takeaway here. The stories are great. They're good. Ray Bradbury is like a classic author with all these big thinky ideas. They're all very thoughtful and uh what's like introspective. The problem is that there's some flat characters in there and so many inconsistencies that it's just impossible to take seriously as a novel. I mean, the Martians themselves. I mean, come on. One story says they're everywhere. Two stories later, they all die of chickenpox. Three stories later, they're coming back as like duplicates of human people. In another story, the Martian is like a ghost that's out of time, that's actually lived many centuries in the past. It it's completely unexplainable. And then by the end you don't get any explanation. There's a lot of playing around with immateriality with the Martians and whether they're really there, whether they're not, like who are they? They come in the form of humans a lot. They seem to come out of nowhere. People don't know where they're living, but they say they're like out there in the distance. It's kind of a cool feeling, but it never amounts to anything. I mean, I feel like if I was writing this book, like if I was editing, soldering together all these short stories to make a fix-up novel, I would add a little sentence in the end to sort of, I don't know. I don't know. So overall, I just have some very mixed feelings about this book. It's a classic of science fiction. I don't know. I think people just really like Ray Bradbury and his short stories, and that's valid. But he should be best short story author because this book is not a novel. So I'm not sure why it's best sci-fi novels of all time. And yeah, it should just be best short stories of all time. Yeah. So those were my thoughts about this book. I'm gonna say give a hearty like f you to my sister for making me read this book. No, I'm just playing. I'm just playing. It was a fine book. It was a great time. I love my sister, but yeah, it was very mixed. But I'll see you later, booktube. Bye.